Racial, cultural and religious issues have led to wars, genocides and slavery shaking humanity to its core time and time again. Often people question why these conflicts exist, and it is usually due to hate passed down from one generation to the next. But how far back do these tainted ideologies go? And where exactly could this kind of hate have been born? Let's look deeper into our past, starting at the very beginning. Around 300,000 years ago, across eastern and southern Africa, a new hominoid species was evolving, one that would change the world in ways they could have never imagined. Modern humans, scientifically known as Homo sapiens, would come during a time when dramatic climate change was affecting most of Africa, and our introduction into the world would be one of ever-changing adaptation. Homo sapiens' early lives consisted of hunting and gathering. We lived in small groups scattered across the eastern and southern regions, following herds of cattle and plants during harvest seasons for food. This possibly led us to other areas of Africa, such as Western and Northern Africa. Most of our survival was based on how well we worked together. This may have also contributed to our standing as the final human species remaining. During our early life, we coexisted with around 8 other human species. We know there were 2 to 3 unidentified hominoid species in Africa, Neanderthals in Eurasia, Floresiensis in Indonesia, Denisovans across Asia and Siberia, Homo longi in China, Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, Homo naledi in South Africa, and Homo erectus in both Africa and Asia. We are believed to be descendants of Homo heidelbergensis, an ancestor also shared with Neanderthals. Homo heidelbergensis was one of the first human species to learn to adapt to cold weather. They were also one of the first human species believed to take down big game. Wooden spears found across Europe and Africa tell the stories of skilled huntsmen who excelled at their craft. It is said that Homo heidelbergensis began in Europe and later made their way to Africa, splitting their genes into 2 different groups, European, Neanderthals, and Africans, Homo sapiens. Many wonder if travelling was a skill they passed down to their offspring. In 2017, in Jebel Irhoud, Morocco, the oldest Homo sapien remains to date were found. Some researchers believe Morocco could be the origin of Homo sapiens, but others believe this is an indication we were travelling long before we originally thought. New studies show there were plenty of opportunities for Homo sapiens to move across Africa and possibly leave before the Great Migration. So what could our Moroccan counterpart have been doing that far away from the others? We will probably never know. But what is apparent is that Homo sapiens were a skilled species who knew more than enough to survive, communicate, and come together as a collective. Studies show that East Africa used to be wetlands, which would have been perfect conditions for earlier humans because it meant they had food and water. But around 125,000 years ago, the climate would shift and dry up. These drying periods would affect food and water. Studies show that during these dry periods there would be short-lived climate shifts that were wet. So, around 60,000 years ago, one of these wet periods began, and this would be the moment a mass migration happened for our species. Mass migrations out of Africa happened approximately 70 to 90,000 years ago, according to some researchers. Many groups are believed to have settled in an ancient region that included Iran, Saudi Arabia, and southeast Iraq for thousands of years before pushing out to Europe and Asia. As Homo sapiens leave Africa, other human species start becoming extinct. Many scientists argue that new human species came and went during our earlier hominoid life, so it was only a matter of time before it happened. Researchers believe their extinction can be due to many reasons such as climate change, lack of food and resources, an emergence between our species, we killed them off, or a combination of them all. But one species in particular would match our energy and drive, and we would live alongside them for more than 10,000 years. Homo sapiens made it to Europe approximately 40 to 48,000 years ago, according to different articles. But our new encounter may have been the one that started it all. Neanderthals were a species that, much like us, also had their own culture, language and art. They existed in Europe for more than 350,000 years and possibly as long as 500,000 years, predating Homo sapiens. Neanderthals were not just cavemen, as depicted in much of the media today. They were pretty intelligent and responsible for creating refined stone technology and bone tools. Homo sapiens would follow up in later years with inventions like fishhooks, bows and arrows, harpoons, and needles made of bone and ivory. But Neanderthals played a big part in our advancement in tools. There is not much evidence to support our interactions with the Neanderthals, but a 40,000-year-old Neanderthal skull was found with a fracture in it, indicating violence may have taken place. Neanderthals were also big game hunters. This is shown through healed and unhealed bone fractures found on the species. Neanderthals also had their own culture and tools. This could be a clue that we learned these skills from our shared ancestor, Homo heidelbergensis. We have many shared characteristics, meaning whoever taught them also taught us. But around 40,000 years ago, this species would also go extinct, and a couple thousand years later so would Denisovans, making Homo sapiens the last human species on Earth. With every extinction, Homo sapiens took over in those regions. This is what I call the silent period. Silent periods can be considered an extension of prehistoric times. During these periods, Homo sapiens were settling into their new habitats and getting acquainted with their new surroundings. They were still operating in smaller groups, though they would have been in closer proximity to other groups. The silent periods have much to do with our forgotten past. We began to create new identities over the silent period, and due to cooler climates and mixing with lighter complexion species, Africans began to lose their deep dark brown tones, which would soon fade to lighter browns and tans. And across Europe and Asia, it began to lighten to white. We are not certain of what could have happened during this time, but this would have been a period where we were becoming creative and learning to communicate more effectively, and as we can see from history, eventually coming together to create civilization. Around 10,000 years ago, we started to see our first civilizations. The Mesopotamian civilization is believed to be the oldest known civilization in the world, a civilization that developed between 4000 and 3500 BCE in the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in modern-day Iraq, Kuwait and Syria. Indus Valley civilization may predate both Egypt and Mesopotamia civilizations by around 2,000 years, according to new studies. The Indus civilization existed from around 5500 BCE to 3300 BCE and extended from modern-day northwest Afghanistan to northwest India and Pakistan. This civilization was thought to have died off due to climate and/or competition with other upcoming civilizations. If we pay attention to our earliest civilizations, we see they are all leading out of Africa and follow the direction we migrated when originally leaving. That shows us that settlers in these areas may have become civilized long before other groups who may have kept pushing into more secluded areas, such as Europe or Asia. These earlier settlements would have been the beginning of a soon-to-be-forgotten journey that got us there in the first place. In early civilizations, we begin to see who we have become. Slavery, war and genocides happened within city-states, mostly Mesopotamia and Egyptian civilizations. The Indus Valley civilization, on the other hand, was more peaceful than that of Mesopotamia and Egyptian civilizations. There is no known evidence of war, and this civilization was thought to be a utopia, a place that had no wars or inequalities. There is also no evidence to support the burning or sacking of cities in the Indus civilization, and much of this could have come from their belief systems. Slavery came into existence as early civilizations were being created. They would have needed help with labor and harvesting plants on larger scales. Most slaves were said to be taken as captives from war, but could have also been criminals or sold for debts and other reasons. Early civilizations are where the discord began, and systems of hierarchy began to unfold. The first recorded war dates back to 2700 BCE and was between the Sumer and Elam. Historians believe this could be due to competition over resources. There were many wars across ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, and eventually these wars would trickle their way down into future societies through religion. Over the next millennia, civilizations would rise and fall. With each civilization, we created new identities. From old lives, we created new ideas and stories, and what used to be fights for survival turned into wars of religion, race, and culture. Many issues created around race, culture, and religion were created through religion itself. Many wars during the Mesopotamia era were attributed to the gods to restore order. So, religion has played a huge role in the division of civilizations for a long time. When we look at religion, many of our religious stories begin in the Mesopotamian period, especially with Christianity and Judaism. There are many similarities between our stories and theirs. For example, the Sumerian story of the gods who came from the skies in search of gold sounds much like a place we know described in the Bible as having streets paved with gold heaven. Another example would be Gilgamesh of Uruk, one of the oldest legends about a cruel ruler who faced many trials and tribulations placed upon him by the gods. It was also the first mention of a mighty flood predating the biblical version of Noah's Ark. It was written as a poem across 12 clay tablets, which would have made it an important story for someone to go through the work. The flood in Gilgamesh's story would have been the Babylonian flood, where the people believed the gods purposefully tried to destroy humanity. In Noah's story, God was trying to save humanity. But it leaves a question: could this have been the same flood told in the story of Noah's Ark, but from a different perspective and era? Many of the cruel stories of the Bible would eventually lead to the justification of division. The curse of Ham, the story of when Noah cursed his son, would be used by Europeans to justify slavery and African genocides, claiming people of darker skin tones were children of Ham and therefore cursed. Other stories, such as the Tower of Babel, which was believed to be in southern Mesopotamia in a territory called Shinar, were used as a way for early Christians to condemn other religions and beliefs. These misinterpretations would eventually wreak havoc on future generations. By the time religions like Christianity and Judaism come around, our violent past is set in stone through stories within religious texts. This would become a way to get everyone on the same page. This would have made controlling people easier. Old gods showed no favoritism, as we see in stories like the Tower of Babel, where God destroyed the temple because the leaders were becoming too powerful. During Mesopotamian times, people would have believed this was a sign from the gods against the powerful, and this may have invoked smaller wars within civilizations. But newer gods began to favor priests and clergy, and whatever they say is that of holiness and must not be questioned, so we can see why this way of worship would have eventually taken over. Even with threats of hellfire, underworlds and purgatories, humanity never slowed down. We continued our crusades, genocides and wars. There have been about 260 wars since World War I, and in the 20th century alone, around 108 million people died fighting these wars. Around 43 genocides occurred between 1956 and 2016, from what we know according to the Political Instability Task Force, resulting in about 50 million deaths. Even though slavery may no longer involve whips and chains, the International Labour Organization estimated around 50 million people are experiencing modern-day slavery. This would include people in forced labour and marriages, debt bonding, and sex trafficking. These are the same issues that have historically plagued our species since we started civilizations. Most of our troubles as a species date back further than we will ever realize. From the moment Homo sapiens left Africa, we would begin just one of many beginnings that would follow. Over and over again, our species have beat the odds and come out on top. As we continue to reside in the world around us, we must remember where we came from and how we got to where we are. Until then, we will find ourselves stuck in the same cycle, making the same mistakes over and over again.